Good afternoon. My name is Ben Cashore. I'm a professor of environmental governance and political science in our school. I'm currently in Copenhagen, Denmark, and so couldn't be there in person, but I look forward to seeing you all very soon. And the reason I'm talking to you today and why I'm making this YouTube video is to explain to you how important it is that you take the social science foundations class called the Politics and Practice of Environment and Resource Policy. Now, why is this class important? It's important because it scours the universe of social science to see its utility in making and understanding, describing, and prescribing better environment and resource policies. Policies that might have a chance of actually lasting, becoming durable, and therefore meaningfully addressing some of the key environmental and social challenges of facing all of us as we try and steward this planet towards a more sustainable outcome. Okay, so what we do in the class is we begin, first of all, by looking at what we call policy functions. And there are 5 policy functions, 5. Okay? The first one is agenda setting. Why is it that some policies actually get onto the policy-making agenda, and why don't others? What problems get on the policy agenda, what don't others? It's an important question. For example, 20 years ago, when I was young, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was young, smoking in businesses and classrooms was very prevalent. And it was so prevalent, nobody had the right to say, hey, please stop. The norm, the practice, was that smoking was fine. I would actually have professors, since I have asthma, and literally cough and wheeze when they're smoking. I would have professors saying to me, hey Ben, what's wrong? And I'd be like, I've got asthma. Your smoke is making me sick. And they'd be like, oh, that's terrible. What can we do? And they'd keep on smoking because the norms were so ingrained that never got even discussed. But lo and behold, within 4 years, by 1986, there was no smoking in any office building, in any restaurant, and in any classroom. The norms had changed. We will tap into social science literature to understand better the processes through which we might gain norm change, and therefore get some ideas and some policies on the problem policy agenda that currently are not. Very important, real world, tapping into social science. Okay, the next function is policy formulation. What do we know from this literature about how to formulate durable policies? What are the things to avoid? What are the things to actually nurture? What are the strategies for formulating good policies? Third function is decision making. How do we characterize how decisions are actually made, and ought we to change the way in which they're actually made? We tap into the literature in social science in general, and especially political science and policy studies for its insights. The fourth policy function is implementation. How do we actually go about implementing a policy we all love and think is great? What do we do? What are the things to avoid? What are the things to actually nurture? And finally, evaluation. How do you evaluate policies that have been in place for their effectiveness? What are the different techniques involved in looking at the question of effectiveness? Okay, so these are 5 functions that come from social science and set in motion in broad perspective to get you to think about how to solve durable policy problems. Okay? The second part of the class says, okay, how then do we make and compare policy options? What are the techniques available to us that might make us become and develop more informed policies? We study then the science of policymaking. How do different people make decisions? How do different agencies make decisions? And what does the research tell us about the implications of those choices for addressing problems? Now, to reinforce this point, we then actually have you take a common technique in policy studies called multi-goal policy analysis to write a memo comparing 4 policy options for a hypothetical government client about a real-world actual problem. And then we're going to show you the techniques and then also test you on your ability to conduct that kind of analysis. It gets even better. After this, we then bring in people from the real world, NGOs, foundation heads, government leaders, and ask them, well, how do you make policy? And what are the things we didn't learn in the textbooks that your experiences might be useful for thinking about as you go out into the world after you attend FES? Okay? So the real world people come in and we ask them, what can we learn from you? Okay? Then, after all that happens, the final part of the class says, okay, we've learned that a big problem is political feasibility. Sometimes it's very hard to initiate, for example, a carbon tax. Even though we know from economists, our wonderful economist colleagues, that a carbon tax is much more efficient than a cap and trade program. And yet politically, cap and trade is a bit more salient. Or even that is not that salient. Okay, so what we do is we say, okay, what can we take from the social science analyses of the policy process about feasibility and potentially change feasibility calculations? So instead of accepting feasibility as being a constraint, what can we do to intervene to actually change feasibility? And there we look at literature on policy learning, where we see how government officials can actually nurture broader understandings among stakeholders about instrument choice that might actually open up political opportunities. We look at the role of science in shaping and changing political feasibility, and we look at the role of stickiness and pathways as ways to think about unlocking and creating new possibilities for verbal action. So this is why this class is important. It's real world. It draws on the leading social science and political science scholarship in the policy process, but it's meant to help you think about why policy is important and the techniques that are useful in applying this kind of perspective. Finally, I know my time's getting short. Just to highlight, when you finish the class, you're going to have 3 core competencies. You will have 3 core competencies. 3. The first is that you'll be able to understand the political arena in which the public policies are actually formulated, implemented, and the role of things like ideas and science and learning in shaping those policies. You will also gain, secondly, an appreciation for the strengths and weaknesses of a range of social science approaches and policy analysis techniques relevant for addressing complex problems that often exist across multiple scales. And third, you will leave with the ability to write a clear, concise policy analysis that contrasts and evaluates different policy options for a client. I look forward to meeting all of you and to seeing you in the class. And if you have any questions, you can talk to Mike or Lisa, who are here in the room. Mike or Lisa, you can say hello now. They're over there. And you can also email me at benjamin.cashore@yale.edu. Okay, see you soon.